Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Kiana Canada. Welcome to the Kiana Canada Show. Today, we have a lot to talk about, but before we get into today's topic, which is going to be other victims coming out and speaking out against Marcy Correctional Facility, before we start to actually talk about that, don't forget to like this video, share, and subscribe to this channel. Your likes, your shares actually pushes videos like this up in the algorithm. What it does is it tells the algorithm that these videos are important, and what it also does, ladies and gentlemen, is it actually educates people about some of the crimes that are taking place within the United States of America. Before I get into the video, so I have one more thing to say is that, ladies and gentlemen, as you know, I am a person that is going through transnational repression. Transnational repression is where states reach across their borders to silence the dissent of their citizens. They do it in a number of ways. One way in which they do it is by actually silencing dissent online. And so they are using their intelligence capacities to silence uh, their citizens, and not only their citizens, but also foreign nationals that seem their speech is the state does not like their speech. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I will be actually talking about this surveillance system, this surveillance state in another video. We're not going to be talking about that in this particular video, but I just want you to be reminded that the microphone that I have is brand new, that there's nothing wrong with these headphones. There's really nothing wrong with the webcam that I have. The webcams here at Queen's University are brand new webcams, and they work perfectly. The devices that I'm using, such as the desktop computers, they also work perfectly. So any disturbances in this video that you may recognize or notice is actually disturbances coming from the state to try and sow doubt about the content that I'm bringing, to try and take our attention off the content that I'm bringing to you, also as a form of intimidation, so I can stop talking about the subjects that we are talking about. And not only that, ladies and gentlemen, it's being used as a form of degrading, inhumane, and degrading treatment because it is continuous. So just keep in mind that I am attaching a cease and desist letter in every single video that I do. I'm putting an exhibit number. So if this video happens to log me out, so let's say, for instance, you see that there is like a glitch where I tell you, hello, everybody, I'm coming back. Sorry, I was logged out. I did not log myself out. Someone else logged me out. That has happened a few times, has actually logged me out of the entire live stream and out of my account. And so, ladies and gentlemen, that is going to be documented as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into today's topic. Ladies and gentlemen, there are more victims of Marcy Correctional Facility coming out and speaking out against abuse. Now, Status Quo uploaded a video where a few persons, previously incarcerated persons, were speaking out individually against, well, individually and collectively against their abuse in the prison system. And so there were multiple accounts, and some people said that this was something that happened on a regular basis. So, what was happening was that inmates were being brutalized in this penal system. They were, and this was a continuous practice. And one thing that stood out to me is that one of the persons that was talking about their ill treatment stated that they didn't really have anyone else within that group, like a human rights organization, backing them up in their claims against the state. So they were out there advocating for themselves without human rights organizations actually there to recognize that they had been harmed while they were incarcerated. And ladies and gentlemen, we must be reminded that we recognize that people do that people make mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes lead to a person being incarcerated, such as Robert Brooks and the gentleman that we've seen out there protesting against the arbitrary execution of Robert Brooks. But ladies and gentlemen, just because someone makes a mistake and they end up in prison, and that is not a green light for the state to put them in a perpetual cycle of abuse, perpetual cycle of intimidation, perpetual cycle of cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment. And this is what it appears to me, is that the state is looking at persons who are incarcerated and really focusing probably on the fact that they are within the jail system, and it appears to me that they're focusing on that, or within this prison industrial complex, and and not treating them as humans, not saying that these persons are human beings. Now, I understand, ladies and gentlemen, I understand that prison is a tough place and a lot can go on. And I don't know what is going on in Marcy Correctional Facility. I don't know what's taking place there. But what I'm hearing, ladies and gentlemen, from the victims is that they are definitively stating, asserting with, they're asserting that they are being brutalized in these prisons. And so that's something that we have to reflect on as a people. And I'm going to continue to say that, is we just need to reflect on this kind of treatment that people are being put through within these systems. I think it's unfair. It's deeply disconcerting. When a person uh, allegedly commits an offense, and if that offense leads to prosecution and a judgment that is a guilty judgment, right? So a guilty verdict or a plea bargain or whatever. And that person has to go and serve time in the prison system. That time that they are serving is the punishment. That time that they are serving is the sentence. Do you need to punish them any further is the question. The answer is no. They're already being punished. Some people are in there for multiple years. And so uh, are you, are you telling us that when a person is incarcerated, when they finally, for example, if they plead guilty, or a jury finds them guilty, or a judge finds them guilty, and they are sentenced to a number of years in prison, are you telling me that that's not the sentence? That's not the punishment? That there's other punishment? Like this is just preliminary going into a punishment? Like, what is this? And so it raises the question as to whether there is a level of jeopardy that's happening to people that are incarcerated. So I understand that double jeopardy means that a person is being retried for the same offense, or they are being charged for the same offense twice, right? I understand that that is double jeopardy. But we must be mindful, ladies and gentlemen, that what we are seeing is triple jeopardy, quadruple jeopardy. There is a continuum of violence that's happening within these prison systems. And that's not to say that anybody is perfect. That's not to say that any person who is incarcerated is perfect. But the state has a duty to protect those that it is taking within that is incarcerating them within its custody. The state has an obligation to protect them, and to not only an obligation to protect them, but an obligation to ensure that their needs are being met adequately. And so we've seen that in the Robert Brooks case, right? He needed medical treatment and he needed it very early. And yet, in that particular case, what we've seen is that correctional officers kept beating him and beating him and beating him and beating him. And that's really disconcerting, to say the least. I also have, we must also remember that these crimes, ladies and gentlemen, when we're thinking about the prison system, what it really is, it's a carnival mirror. And what do I mean by that? So, a carnival mirror is where, do you know, have you ever been to a carnival? I know most of you have. You've been to a carnival and you see these like carnival mirrors that are distorting you. You know, some are making you look shorter, some are making you look thinner, bigger, zigzag, and basically, some scholars argue that the prison system is actually really a carnival mirror of it's a reflection of a distorted reflection of really the criminality that is taking place within society. And so, for example, you have particular people that are incarcerated. And so there is a lot of scholars that are arguing that, there is this propaganda that is being put out that specific persons are the main persons that are engaging in criminality, right, such as Black Americans. That's propaganda that's being put out. And ladies and gentlemen, most cases, when you look at it, when you look at the cases that have to do with exonerations of uh, people that are on death row, people, not only people that are on death row, but just kind of a commutation of sentences, right? You see that most of those persons who are exonerated are Black people, because and there is what I believe to be a system in place that is, one, unfairly prosecuting Blacks and overcharging them, and or so over criminalizing, overcharging them, over sentencing them. And so when you go back and you really, sometimes these trials can take a long time, and then whenever there is evidence compiled at the onset, that evidence is not really reviewed in its totality. It's not really examined. And so prosecutors will do anything to get a conviction, right? And that's what it appears to be in the United States. They'll do anything to get a conviction if the defendant is Black, that they will work overtime, overboard to get a conviction. And oftentimes what we see is that evidence or that trial is often unfair, and inadequate counsel, ineffective counsel. And so a lot of those cases, let me refer back to not only inadequate counsel or ineffective counsel, but in some cases, ladies and gentlemen, the evidence is really not there. The evidence is, it's questionable. And so years later, when these appeals are happening, and you have a team of lawyers looking at the evidence and examining everything, there is a lot of discrepancies in these cases, multiple discrepancies. And so I am deeply concerned about what is taking place at the Marcy Correctional Facility. I am of the opinion that, excuse me, I've been talking all day. I'm of the opinion, ladies and gentlemen, that what we've seen that happened to Robert Brooks is actually a crime against humanity. Yes, it was an arbitrary execution, but when crimes, when there is an element of persecution, an element of torture, an element of degrading treatment and punishment, it makes up a crime against humanity. Now, I understand the United States of America is not a party to the Rome Statute. The United States, even if we wanted to, even if we all wanted to bring a case against the United States for these prison beat up gangs, these correctional officers that are arbitrarily taking life, it would be very difficult to do that unless, ladies and gentlemen, unless everybody came together and saw that as a wrong. Everyone came together and said, you know what, that is wrong. That shouldn't happen to anyone, no matter who they are, no matter what their race is, no matter what their ethnicity is, no matter what their skin color is. That shouldn't happen to anyone. But, ladies and gentlemen, in the United States, we don't have enough people that believe that. It's excuse me. It's unfortunate that we have some people that look at what happened to Robert Brooks and they look at it and they think, yeah, it's unfortunate that we have some people that look at it that way. They look at it as a win, and it's not a win. It really makes the United States look bad. That video was deeply disturbing. When you look at that video, you see multiple officers attacking, punching, choking a defenseless man in handcuffs. Now, again, I'm not looking back at the person's history. We understand. We're obviously viewing this from the lens of we're looking into the window of a prison system. So we're not fooled that this person, is incarcerated. And so I'm not saying, okay, we shouldn't pretend that the person is not incarcerated. No, we all know. We all know that he is incarcerated. But as we're looking into this window, ladies and gentlemen, what we're seeing is that a person is incarcerated and they are handcuffed and they're being brutalized over and over by different people coming in and taking a shot. And ladies and gentlemen, I really want to develop a theory because I've noticed that this happens and I haven't quite been able to formulate it. And ladies and gentlemen, I have really been putting a pause on creating any theories and putting them out into the public, because I've seen that my content is highly suppressed right now. In some instances, when I've actually like written stories, when I was in the Republic of Ireland, and I wrote some news stories on my own website. My website is somehow is deactivated right now. And so from my end, I don't know what you're seeing from your end. From my end, I can't access it, and I can't see any of the articles. But when I was in the Republic of Ireland and I was actually blogging from my website, I would come up with these headlines and be reminded that this was before Chat GPT came out. So all of these articles were actually, my blood, sweat, and tears. And so when I would write articles, I would see how like someone was giving it to journalists in the Republic of Ireland, like my headlines. They were giving my headlines to journalists in the Republic of Ireland, and so basically my articles were being delisted and de-indexed, and my headlines were being stolen and taken and given to journalists in the Republic of Ireland who was actually using those headlines. So that's neither here nor there, ladies and gentlemen. I am going to continue to write, but right now, to tell you the truth, and I'm getting off subject, but I just kind of want to, go into this because we're talking about theories and how I want to develop a theory that's tied to what we've seen in the Roberts Brooks case. So before I return back to that, I want to say that like I really haven't been um writing online a lot. So all of my writing is actually being done that I'm doing myself without any chat GPT. I'm not doing it with that. I'm doing all my writing for myself in my LLM, International Human Rights Program. I'm doing that all myself, but I'm not actually publishing anything anymore because as you can see, if you go to my Substack, I published like 100 articles, and none of that is showing in the search engine. So this is indicative of transnational repression. Okay, so returning back, I really want to create a theory in research, what I see to be lynching and an attack by multiple people on one person, and it's kind of like there is tag team attacks that are happening to Black Americans. I'm noticing that is that, for example, if a Black American is the state is seeking to persecute a Black American, what will happen, ladies and gentlemen, is that the state will give imprimatur not only to correctional officers but to non-state actors to attack Black Americans. And so once one person is finishing attacking a Black American, then another person comes in. And then so again, it's this perpetual cycle of oppression. And so that's deeply concerning. And I think it's something that we really need to investigate further, right? And to look into further. Okay, so how is this a crime against humanity, right? Because that's what I said. A crime against humanity involves, if it involves an element of torture, if it involves an element of persecution, if it involves an element of degrading treatment and punishment, and if the person is arbitrarily executed, that would be considered crimes against humanity. But you may say, hey, wait a minute, Kiana, you need to go deeper about this. Like, tell us more, because crimes against humanity seems to be um, you know, uh, in international humanitarian law. And so, how is this applicable to domestic settings? Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's applicable because if the crime is widespread and systematic. And so, I'm going to be reading some things from this book. And it's a Principles of International criminal law. So I said humanitarian law, but I meant criminal law. So this is Principles of International Criminal Law. I've actually checked this book out like 4 or 5 times from the library. It's so interesting. Like, if you read it, ladies and gentlemen, it is detailed and it's an easy book to follow, easy book to read. I recommend that you actually read it or check it out and find it. It's called Principles of International Criminal Law. It's by Gerhard Rohrl and Florian Jesberger. This is a really interesting book. Again, I've checked this book out from the library like 4 times. And so I'm going to be reading from this book. And so, what is widespread or systematic character? So, the criterion of widespread describes a quantitative character and, excuse me, a quantitative element, which also allows conclusions to be drawn. And let's see, I'm trying to put this where I can actually, okay. So, which also allows conclusions to be drawn. Trying to put this where I can actually talk in. Conclusions to be drawn about the quality of attack. The widespread nature of the attack can be inferred from its extension over a broad geographic area. But this is not necessary to satisfy the requirement. So, ladies and gentlemen, the question is there a broad systematic abuse, specifically Black prisoners, formerly incarcerated persons in the United States? Are we seeing like that attack is widespread? Are we seeing that this is systematic in character? The characteristic is very systematic. The answer is yes. And so the widespread character of an attack can also be derived from the number of victims. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about the number of victims. And so what we see when it comes to the Marcy Correctional Facility, ladies and gentlemen, we see a number of victims that are protesting against the Roberts Brooks attack on status quo. And they are also stating that they have been a victim of this ill treatment. So it really depends on the number of victims, and that is clarified by the International Law Commission commentary on the corresponding article of the 1996 draft code. So that's one. Second is perpetrators, okay, right? So does the perpetrator meet the definition under crimes against humanity? So perpetrators, ladies and gentlemen, they need not be members of the state or organizations involved in the crime, but can include all persons who act to implement or support the policy of the state or organization. So remember, in the Roberts Brooks case, ladies and gentlemen, what we've seen I think a nurse or an LVN that was present during the time that Robert Brooks was being beaten and had actually allegedly joined in on it. Now, in the video, I didn't see that nurse joined in. Like, I didn't see that video. Maybe that video is still out there. Maybe that video is being suppressed. But what I do know is that there is a level of negligence there, because what did the medical personnel do? They just stood there and watched and laughed. So again, it can include all persons who act to implement or support a policy of the state or organization. So let's take that even further. So typical examples of commissions of a crime by private persons are denunciations that lead to deprivation of liberty or to the death of the victim, what we've seen in the Roberts Brooks case. And another element that I think is very important is degrading treatment and punishment. And so what is that, right, ladies and gentlemen? So According to the Geneva Convention, when we're talking about degrading treatment and punishment, what this is acts or omissions that cause serious mental or physical suffering, represents a serious attack on bodily or psychological integrity, or otherwise contravene the principles of humanity or inhuman or inconsistent with the concept of humanity. Does any of that ring a bell? Like, did we see that in the Roberts Brooks case? Let me read that again. It is stated acts or omissions that cause serious mental or physical suffering represents a serious attack on bodily or psychological integrity or otherwise contravene the principle of humanity are inhuman and inconsistent with the concept of humanity. This is in international criminal law defining what degrading treatment or inhumane and cruel treatment is. And so, ladies and gentlemen, there is more, right? So, this includes violations of human dignity. The question here is, was Robert Brooks and the inmates, excuse me, and the formerly incarcerated persons that spoke out against Marcy Correctional Facility on status coup, were they debased? Were they degraded? Was there a loss of dignity within this system? And I think the answer to that question is yes. Now, under international criminal law, a perpetrator is also guilty of inhumane treatment if he subjects his victims to inhuman conditions. What is inhuman conditions? Well, an inhuman condition is what we have seen in the Robert Brooks video, where you have a person that is being brutalized by several officers at one time. You have medical personnel that is standing outside the door. They have a job to ensure that you are safe and to ensure that, I think it's incumbent on them as well to protect your right, excuse me, to protect the right of life of any person that is incarcerated. And yet, what we've seen is that they were standing on the outside of the door laughing and giggling. There were, going back to the formerly incarcerated persons, the gentlemen that were actually protesting the Robert Brooks uh, unalivement, they were actually protesting this and doing interviews. And one person rightfully, and I can't remember which gentleman it was, but they brought up the United Nations, and that person was on the right track. Ladies and gentlemen, the United Nations is in New York City, and what I would have done, what should have been done, ladies and gentlemen, is that that group should have marched down to the United Nations and protested there and asked for assistance and asked for the United Nations to condemn that attack. Now, I'm not saying that they should go to the United Nations. Let me clarify. I'm not saying that they should go to the United Nations and cause havoc or, tear up the place. No, the United Nations is where there is, members from all states. So if you have an issue or a problem, so you have a number of representatives from different states that can hear you out, right? So there is not a bias there. Sometimes if you have a number of people from different states and you're telling them a particular issue or a circumstance or incident that's taken place, it is likely to be condemned than actually preaching to the people that are actually perpetrating the violation. So it would have been nice to see those men march to the United Nations and peacefully protest and ask the United States, excuse me, the United Nations to intervene. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let's see, that's in Marcy, New York. I'm not sure how far. I'm not going to look it up now, but I'm not sure how far Marcy, New York is from New York, New York. But I know that. Let's see. Maybe I should. Maybe I should look it up. Let's see. Oh, okay. So, so that probably what I'm seeing online, and that could, I don't know if this is accurate, but it's showing that it's about approximately 4 hours. So they would actually need to plan this in advance, right? Because it's going to be a long trip, and to march down to the United Nations and peacefully protest and ask for the United Nations to condemn the attack, to recognize that this was an arbitrary execution, and more importantly, ladies and gentlemen, is that the United States must honor its commitment to international covenants and treaties and conventions. And when we see attacks like we've seen with Robert Brooks, this is showing us that the United States is not honoring its commitment to its international covenants, and the ratifications of those covenants, the ratifications of those conventions. And so I think right now is a perfect time for the United States to really reflect on the nation, make the nation safe. I mean, live up to the name, the best country in the world. Live up to the name that it's the safe country. Like when we see acts like that, that is telling us that the country is not safe. Live up to the name that you are the land of the free. I mean, this is a very our country, the United States of America, is a very rich country. Yet we have one of the largest homeless populations in the world, and we have one of the largest prison populations as well. And so this is the time for there to be some restructuring. And again, I will say, like, the video that came out with the gentlemen that were protesting against the Roberts Brooks arbitrary execution, this is showing us that this is systematic and it's widespread within this correctional facility. There needs to be lustration. They need to go in there and terminate from the top all of those officials and bring in new leadership. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm hoping that there is some change. I am going to be following this story and other stories like this. And tell me what you think. Do you think that this is an arbitrary execution, the Robert Brooks unalivement? Do you think that fits the definition of arbitrary execution? If you don't know what that definition is, I will link the video to this video, the Robert Brooks video, so that you can actually go in, because I talk about that, and you can go into the timestamps, and actually there's a definition timestamp where you can go and listen to that. Also, do you think that this constitutes a crime against humanity? If so, tell me your thoughts. If you don't think that this constitutes crimes against humanity, I want to know your thoughts as well. Like, what evidence do you have to support that? Before I go, I want to really recommend that if you are a law student, like I am an international human rights law student, but I'm not taking criminal law. I just am interested in law. So I often read books that are not within my program. And so if you are a law student or if you're an international criminal law student, I would definitely recommend this book, Principles of International Criminal Law. This is the third edition. There's, I think, two before this. I'm not sure if there's a fourth edition, but it's by Gerhard Worrell and Florian Jesberger. Again, I checked out that book like 4 times. It's interesting because it has a lot about crimes against humanity, crimes of aggression, war crimes, etc. And so if you are kind of interested in learning more about like what constitutes a war crime or what constitutes a crime against humanity, I would recommend that you actually check out that book. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. I am Kiana. I am probably going to be following this story, most likely. And again, before I end this video, I hope that you have an excellent day. Remember, before we go, that we must do our duty to condemn violence in all its forms. We must do our duty to actually take a stand peacefully against any act of violence, any act that's against national security, any crime against humanity, and say that that is not okay. We must do our duty to keep the peace. And when we advocate for change, we do peacefully, we do intellectually. In some cases, we reach for more, to more understanding. We're reaching for more understanding. We're reaching for more knowledge. And I think that that is the way to bring change. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. I will speak to you next time. Bye-bye.